Okay, good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and children of all ages. Welcome to the third lecture of the Cosmic Zoom series. It's been an absolute pleasure and honor to be part of this amazing venture, and we're really glad to get this going. So, if you're not aware of what this is, the Cosmic Zoom is a virtual exhibition which is brought to you by the International Center for Theoretical Sciences in association with other amazing institutes in Bangalore like the RRI, NCBS, JNCASR, and we want to make it an interactive and engaging way to just bring the science out to the people. We've had a few talks. We've had talk about what's in a diet, and a day before yesterday, Professor Biman Nath from the Raman Research Institute spoke to us about how the discovery of helium in Guntur in South India was responsible for the launch of astrophysics and the very first chemical element discovered by an astronomer and not by a chemist. As you would have noticed, it is not all just physics, because we are not talking about fields. We are talking about scales. And when you're talking about scales, one of the things that first strikes you is size, because whenever you thought of scale, you think how big it is, how small it is. And as a kid, one of the most important things that we learned when we go to school is how big certain animals are. So today we have two amazing biologists with us, two researchers from JNCASR. First of all, we have Professor Amitabh Joshi, who works on evolutionary biology and population dynamics. And he is the founding member of the Indian Society of Evolutionary Biologists, ISEB. So, Professor Amitabh, thank you so much for agreeing to be part of this. Welcome to the talk.
It's a pleasure, Berty.
Thank you, sir. And then we have Professor TNC Vidya. She is into vertebrate behavior and socioecology, and she specializes in studying the socioecology of the ancient elephant in southern India. And I have to say a special thanks to her because she was on field and she's taken her time out of a busy schedule to be with us and give us a talk. I have had an absolute pleasure and honor of having had chats and discussion about both of these amazing professors offline about everything from elephants to Urdu poetry and classic rock and everything else. And I always think we should have this and the public should be engaged in this. And today we decided that's what we are going to do. So Gopi, if you can stop the animation, let's get to this. So today we are talking about why size matters. So let me just start off by telling the general public why we chose this topic. We are right now in a world which technically has the biggest ever animal in the history of the world. It is true. You can't think of anything else bigger than the blue whale as an animal. People look at Jurassic Park or Jurassic World and think, oh, dinosaurs were really huge. Yeah, they were big. But the blue whale is the biggest thing to have ever existed in the history of the world. Okay. And then we're also every day we're looking at small animals like ants and mice and rats. Have you ever wondered why is there such a big difference in size? You know, the very first time I thought what is going on is when I saw a Great Dane standing next to a Pomeranian. I'm like, they are both the same species. Like, what's going on here? What use is the difference in size here? I thought a Pomeranian was a small puppy that will eventually grow up to be a Great Dane. So this concept of size when I was a kid was really fascinating. Until today, when I go to a zoo, I don't know, but when I look at a giraffe or a rhinoceros or a hippo, I get more excited than probably seeing a small ferret or seeing a small vole running around. So when I was told that we will be having a talk about size and we're talking to Professors Amitabh and Vidya, I got very excited and said, we are not going to have a PPT. We are not going to have a lecture. We are going to have a chat. So today, please feel free to put your comments in the chat if you have any doubts, if you have any other queries. And if you're watching this on YouTube, you can put the comments on the YouTube channel as well. We have our moderators there who will pick up those comments and put it here, and we'll pass the questions to the professors here. So to get this going, let's call Professor Amitabh and ask him his views about this. Professor?
Well, I think I'll just start off by making couple of very general points, and then we can see how it flows from there. I think in the living world, when we think about size, there are probably two different ways in which we think about it or we engage with it. One is a sort of a slightly more static view, which is probably what most people have, in that you are looking at species as they are, taking it for granted that this is what the species is like at this point in time. And then one would try to understand, given that this species is roughly, the individuals of this species are a particular size, how does that affect the way in which they are affected by the physical world around them, and how do they affect the physical world around them? What are the consequences for their behavior, their anatomy, their structures, and so on? That is a very common way of looking at it. But then, of course, we are evolutionary biologists, so we also look at it in a slightly more dynamic sense. So we appreciate that species evolve. So even if we are looking at a given species, that species is evolving over time. And one could think about what are the kinds of balance of forces, the costs and benefits of a particular size that shape the evolution of the characteristic body size range of that species. So that's another way in which many of us also think about the size question. Even within a species, how does one evolve towards, let us say, an optimal body size for that species, and what is the balance of costs and benefits that affects that?
Absolutely. So the thing about optimal sizes, as an evolutionary biologist, I think, I mean, I learned from what an evolution is that there's no end point. There's no finality in evolution. It's a continuous process. So we don't know if it's optimal or not until we get there, right?
No, I would say there's a slight nuance to that.
Mm-hmm.
If the environment, hypothetically, were to be completely constant and unchanging, which it is not in reality, it never is. But if it were to be, and you can do that, for example, in a laboratory setting, if you do multi-generation experiments, you can have a very, very constant environment. Then one can actually define an optimal set of characteristics for that unchanging environment, at least in that very artificial scenario in the lab where you are keeping the environment unchanging. But yeah, in nature, the environment is always changing. So in some sense, the goalposts also keep shifting as things evolve.
Professor Vidya?
Yeah. So I agree with what Professor Joshi was saying. So a lot of people have been thinking about these differences in size. And for instance, Galileo in 1914 had talked about this, saying that if an oak tree was, say, 300 feet high, then it wouldn't be able to bear the weight of its own branches. So the concept of how, as a particular form changes in dimensions, but not in the shape, the mass and volume grow to a much faster extent than the area. And therefore, the tree would not be able to bear the weight of its branches. That's something that's quite old. And I mean, I'm sure people must have thought about it before Galileo also, but Galileo has written about it in 1914. And then Haldane has written this wonderful essay on being, and he talks about various examples, which I guess we'll come to today. I don't know, do you want to say something about it, Amitabh? Or?
No, I think we'll just go with it. I didn't even know about this Galileo thing. Actually,
exactly, that it was interesting. As soon as you talked about that, I wanted to talk about the redwood sequoia trees.
Yeah,
they are immensely huge.
Yeah.
I did not know how big they were.
Yeah, the giant sequoias are huge. Yeah.
Yeah, they truly are. I mean, I've been to Sequoia National Park long ago when I was a postdoc. They are seriously huge.
So one of the things I want to talk to about that, just a small tidbit, is the fact that these trees are what are known as carbon sinks. And during the Cosmic Zoom exhibition, in a few days, you're going to learn a lot about those who are participating, who are coming for the other talks. You're going to learn a lot about the carbon cycle and something called the carbon budget, and why lots of biologists, lots of researchers, and also just generally people who are invested in the environment are worried about something called the carbon budget and about the carbon cycle. So that is one thing that we'll be talking about later. And these huge trees, massive life forms, whatever they are, even they are whales or they are forests, they're all excellent ways to trap carbon to make sure it doesn't get released in the atmosphere. So that is another reason why we should keep all these huge species alive. I just want to talk about that. Yes, but let's go back to Vidya. And you could bring out the examples right away.
Okay, so Haldane talks about a few different things, such as the importance of gravity, the importance of mechanical strength, the importance of surface tension to animals of different sizes. So, for instance, if you he brings up this example of tossing a mouse from a building. I mean, hopefully nobody will do this now, but he says that if you toss a mouse from a building, it will fall down, it will scamper away and be relatively unharmed. But then he says, and I quote, "A rat is killed, a man is broken, a horse splashed." Right? So gravity would affect different species differently depending on the mass. But then if you look at very small species, they are not really affected by gravity so much as by surface tension. So if you have an ant, the ant can fall hundreds of times its length and not be affected or not be injured. But an ant would easily drown in water, which larger animals would not do so easily, because there you have the problem of surface tension, and animals then that are that small can face a real danger from drowning even if they go to drink water. So that's one of the things he brings up. So a lot of these examples are based on the square cube law also that that Haldane brings up, where as you change the length, the volume goes up as a cube, but the surface area goes up as a square. So you have a lot of examples where animals are affected differently based on how the surface area to volume ratio changes.
Professor Vidya, I'm glad you brought that up, because I know for a fact that you're an expert on elephants, right? So you work primarily with Asian elephants, but I'm guessing you've also worked with African elephants. Now, one of the things is the difference in size of these animals, right? Mm-hmm. Although they are like pretty much the same species, they are distinct in size. Mm-hmm. And we also know that at some point of time, we had something called mastodons and mammoths. We were extremely huge. So this difference in size in the same species, what would that be attributed to?
Okay, so they are not the same species. Actually, they're different genera.
Genera,
so,
okay.
Yeah, so the Asian elephant and the African elephants, there are two African elephants, the African forest elephant and the African savanna elephant. The Asian elephant has diverged from the African elephants about 5 to 7 million years ago. So they are a much older divergence. They're roughly the same divergence or even older than the human-chimp divergence. And so it's not really the same species. They're very different genera, and there could be a lot of factors affecting the evolution of size. One could be just their ecology. So for instance, we know that species which are isolated on islands tend to become smaller when they are released from predation pressure, or if there is not enough forage, then again you can have body sizes becoming smaller. So there is a species of Elephas maximus is the current day Asian elephant. There's a species Elephas falconeri, which was really small. I mean, much smaller than a human, about half the size. So we know that, there has been dwarfism on islands.
And they're extinct, I'm guessing.
Yeah.
Oh. That's very interesting. Because as a kid, seeing an elephant was the most interesting thing ever. First of all, it didn't look like any animal. It was, everything about it was really big. And then to find out that there is another elephant which is even bigger.
Yeah.
Even
But the African savanna elephant is not that much bigger overall than the Asian elephant, in the sense that the males are bigger, but the females are roughly the same size. So there's greater sexual dimorphism in the African savanna.
Oh, yes, sexual dimorphism. I'm glad you brought that up. That's something else I want to talk about later. But Professor Joshi, you had something to say.
No, I was going to say something related to sexual dimorphism, but we can bring it up whenever you want to bring it up.
Because in the build-up to Cosmic Zoom, the last 2 weeks, we have been also sharing interesting facts on our social media pages. So one of the facts we just shared is about the blanket octopus. So what I discovered and I shared was researchers were always finding a female blanket octopus, and they couldn't find a male blanket octopus, and they were wondering, what is this, some problem, whatever. Then they realized they'd been looking at the wrong scale. Female blanket octopuses are 6 feet long. They're like really big. Male blanket octopuses are like an inch or 2 inches big. So people always thought these were tiny, probably just baby octopi, but they were not. They were actually the males. And this is the biggest difference in size in the same species. It's a biggest gap in sexual dimorphism, and that was just amazing for me. And that was one of the facts that we brought forward, and lots of people thought that was absolutely very interesting.
Another kind of situation where you get these bizarre differences in size scale within a single species, and again, in some sense, arising from the same genomic material, is size differences among castes in some ant species are orders of magnitude. I mean, the smallest worker caste and the largest soldier caste members of the queens, there's a like 100+ fold difference in size. There's actually this very famous photograph of the smallest caste worker perched on the head of a very large soldier, and they're the same species. They develop from the same kinds of eggs in some sense, but the tiny worker is smaller than the head of the soldier.
So, since we're talking about ants, with Professor Vidya also talked about surface tension, and I've seen this thing where ants build a bridge on the water. They act as a colony, and then they use it to cross, water and all. So, obviously, another thing is, as a community, animals which are smaller in size, they tend to work better. Is it a thing like animals which are small in size work better as a community rather than things which are big? They tend to be aloof. Is that a thing? Does size play a role in community building?
Not really. I mean, we have humans who are supposedly working very well as a community.
Yeah, I don't think there's a clear connection. You can probably find examples of each sort.
So you have these communities in highly eusocial insects, and ants happen to be eusocial insects, and they happen to be small. But then you also have eusocial insects among the larger wasps. So I mean, there is some range of difference. There are also naked mole rats, which are eusocial, which are mammals. Mammals that are eusocial.
By the way, Professor Joshi, I think I found the picture also. Let's see if I can share the screen and get it up. There you go.
Yeah.
Right. So again, they're the same species.
Yeah.
They're just different individuals.
I'm just going to ask certain questions which are there in the chat. There's one for Professor Vidya. It was mentioned that how big trees can get. So her question, Tanya, I'm guessing, sorry. Question is, how big can a tree get, and how do they survive and adapt to massive height?
Massive?
Height.
Height.
Yeah.
Okay. I don't know the limits that limits of height that a tree can reach. But yes, I mean, the giant sequoias are really tall. The way that there are a few different challenges. One would be mechanical strength itself. So for instance, if you grow really tall, you have to be very strong to support that bulk, which is why we cannot, for instance, have a gorilla the size of King Kong, right? I mean, unless the bones are made of something other than regular bone.
I was
So you need, you need to have mechanical strength. And in the case of trees, the other big challenge that they face is to get water up to those heights. So when you have the water column going up, there is a limit to how much water can be, to what height the water can be pulled up. So that would be a great challenge. And in fact, when there are droughts, that's a big problem, because if the water column splits up, then you have basically drying up of all of those fibers, right? So that, I guess, would be a very big challenge. I don't know what the other challenges would be in the case of a tree.
No, I think the water is a huge challenge. Actually.
Yeah.
In fact, I'm curious. I don't know this at all. I'm just now thinking about it. I'm curious whether there is something about the vascular system or the water transport system of conifers that permits them, because most of the very, very tall trees are actually conifers, not the regular flowering trees. They are very big flowering trees, but they are big sort of in multiple dimensions, not just going straight up. Because there are differences in the vascular systems, but I don't really know, and I'm just speculating whether there's something that the conifers have that allow them to really become very straight and tall.
So I just checked. The tallest tree is obviously a sequoia called Hyperion. It's 380 feet tall. 115 meters tall, 380 feet.
Wow.
And they very clearly said, the government of the United States government has protected its position, so nobody knows where it is.
Okay.
So we have photos, we know where it is, but only the government knows it. So 380 feet is the height of the tallest tree. Pranav has asked that in the example of ants, is the only difference between sexes size, or do they have other morphological differences? And if so, how can we still call them the same species? Is Pranav's question.
So I think in the example that you showed, it is not even a sex difference. They are all the workers are females.
Yeah.
So they are females, but they develop from the same.
Somebody just asked the same thing. Do the size of ants vary on the roles they play in the colony? Yes. That is yes. Yeah. Okay. So Sutet Day from YouTube, they ask, what determines whether the males will be larger or the females? Are there any major patterns as to which is bigger in which, females or males? Well, like we discovered in the octopus, it's female, but yeah.
Okay, so this is, I guess, across different species, right? There seem to be some lineage-specific patterns, is what I remember. In the sense, in many insects, females are larger than males because females are the ones laying large eggs and so on. In birds, if you look at the falconiforms, the birds of prey, females are larger than males. But then in many polygynous species in which males contest for access to females, males are larger than females. So these are many mammals. I don't know of any single pattern that pervades different lineages.
And I mean, in general, I think in a lot of invertebrates, it is more commonly that females are larger than males. I think in vertebrates, you can see all kinds of patterns much more than in the invertebrates. There are also many species which don't show too much size dimorphism. Where males and females are roughly similar in size also.
So somebody's asked, is there any evolutionary advantage to sexual dimorphism? Arush Murali.
Okay, this is not entirely a general audience.
Can we get a yes or no?
Yeah. In some cases, you can show that there are advantages. In the sense, you can see why a particular sex is larger than the other. So, for instance, if you had a polygynous species, males fight each other for access to females, then amongst the males, you find that the larger ones win. So you can see that there is an advantage to being large.
Right.
So you can see that in some species.
The other thing, just to add a further layer to this, is so very often what happens, because the ecologies of males and females of the same species can sometimes be quite different. The males and females may have a very different optimal size. So, for example, if you are a male of that species, you might be having very good Darwinian fitness, very good success in siring offspring, if you were, say, a particular size. Whereas if you are a female of the same species, the ideal size for you at which you will maximize your offspring production or your Darwinian fitness might be very different from the male optimum. Now you run into a very peculiar problem, because somewhere or the other, the genes that these individuals carry, also many hundreds of genes, will affect body size, right? But these genes, in some generation, they will be in male bodies, in some generations, they will be in female bodies. They go back and forth between males and females. So if you imagine some genes that are giving you a larger body size, and males have a larger optimal body size, when they are in male bodies, they are favored by selection. More copies of them go through to the next generation. But those same genes, those same variants of those genes, when they are in females, they are acted against by selection because the optimal female size is smaller. So there is a seesawing going on, as a result of which neither the males nor the females will be able to attain their optimal size. Okay. So both will be stuck at a non-optimal size because of the problem that across species, the same genes have to affect your size. So one way this particular form of conflict between the sexes in terms of reaching their optimal size would get reduced is by the evolution of some additional factors that allow these genes to be expressed in different ways depending on whether they are in males or females. And that is what will give rise to the sexual size dimorphism. So the size dimorphism is also a present day evidence of an earlier intersexual conflict that has gotten partly resolved in this manner.
That is very interesting. Okay. Okay, now I have to talk about something because Vidya brought it up and I have to talk about is King Kong and Godzilla. Okay. We love big animals, right? I mean, to have a big lizard going in Tokyo or a big gorilla climbing the Empire State Building, it's amazing. Now, as much as we love looking at it, you said it's physically impossible. Right? Can we have some more details about that without spoiling our love for popular culture?
I don't know about the without spoiling, but so when you have an organism that is that much taller and that much wider and so increases a lot, and therefore the mass also increases a lot. But then the organism is supported, I mean, in these cases, by the bones of the leg. And the cross-section of those bones is not increasing proportionate to the mass. Therefore, the cross-section is just increasing as a square. The volume is increasing as a cube, right? So because of that, unless the bones themselves change in their material or in their thickness or in some other disproportionate way, it is not possible for such a large animal to be able to stand straight. Stand even. And again, if with large animals, they have a problem of stumbling. They also have a high momentum. So they can easily stumble. And if they fall, they can break their limbs if they are not strong enough mechanically. So that becomes a big problem with large animals.
I realized this when I was reading up about Robert Wadlow. So Robert Wadlow was the world's tallest man. At some point, he had some glandular defect, and he just kept, unfortunately, growing as he aged. And he was at one point of time 2.72 meters tall, 8 feet 11 inches. That was his height. So when I was reading up about him, people are talking about why he had issues was because the same thing, like you said, his bones were not able to keep up with that. And like even the smallest thing would cause fractures, and his body was not able to pump oxygen. His heart was not able to handle. And he died quite young. And like 8 feet is literally a giant in human terms. So I think that's what, in human, I think 7 feet is the highest, like the WWF wrestlers. Professor Joshi was saying something.
I think it's not surprising. Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
Go ahead. Surprising that the largest creatures, the blue whales, are in the water. Water allows you that freedom to grow larger than on land.
So the largest thing which you can have in a free-flowing environment is on land. That's your point? But for all those people, in water. But for all those people who like big animals on land, big organisms on land, I have good news for you. There is an organism which weighs 440 tons and covers around 9 acres. And it is like brilliant. It actually exists. Only problem, it's a fungus. It's called a honeydew fungus. It's in Oregon, and it's a single organism which stretches 9 hectares in a forest and weighs 440 tons. So technically, it can't go rampaging and like destroying buildings, but it's an actual organism that's 440 tons. It's one organism. So if anybody's interested in making a movie out of that,
see, this in fact brings up another interesting point about how we think of size and scale in biology, right? We tend to think in terms of the individual size, and then sometimes we like to think of numbers of individuals of that species and so on. But if we slightly change our focus and think about, for example, biomass, then even in the animal world, forget the plants, again, like this fungus, there are so many grasses where one individual can spread for literally hectares. But even within the animal world, if we think about biomass, for example, see what we register as being big animals in terms of the size of the individual, the elephants, the hippopotamuses, the rhinoceroses and all. But in every land ecosystem, whatever it is, the maximal biomass is actually due to insects. And even though we get carried away by thinking about the whales and other large marine creatures, in aquatic systems, the maximum biomass is actually the relatives of the insects, the crustaceans. In most ecosystems, the ants alone outweigh most groups of vertebrates in terms of the total weight of all the ants present, for example.
So the biomass, when you mean, is the total amount of...
Right. So if you take the total mass of all the individuals of that species put together.
So by population, if you say humans are like 7 billion, by biomass, we are nowhere close to some of the other species.
We not even close, follow by the ants. The ants have more biomass than us and all our domestic animals put together, which are a few more billion.
So if the ants ever become like super intelligent and decide, you know what, we have to take over the planet, we are done and dusted. Pratik has an interesting question about after watching Finding Nemo. Unfortunately, he went and did some research about clownfish, which spoiled his pop culture. And he said, and he says, the question is it true that initially they're all males, only the largest one in the group transforms into a female? If so, what could be the reason for such behavior? Pratik, that is true in clownfish. There's a single female and there are lots of males which are smaller in size. If the female goes missing, then the next biggest male becomes a female. And one of the reasons they think it could be is because clownfish have very, very tight colonies, and they are centralized around certain colonies of anemone in certain coral areas. It'll be really tough for them to go to some other colony across the seabed and find another female. So it makes much more sense to find another female in their own colony and to continue the species. By the way, I'm sorry, evolutionary biologists are actually here. I'm really sorry.
No, I have no idea about clownfish.
Yes.
No, I have no idea about clownfish in particular either, but I would just like to say that, again, we as humans, we are a species in which males and females are defined at birth. And we continue to be male or female until the point we might choose to undergo surgical intervention or something. But otherwise, we remain whatever we were in terms of our maleness or femaleness. But that is not necessarily true of every species. There are lots of species, both plants and animals, that show hermaphroditism of various kinds. You can have simultaneous hermaphroditism, whereas the hermaphroditic individual is a fertile male and a female at the same time. In some cases, the individual may be structurally male and female at the same time, but the male function and female function may become mature at different points in time. Some cases, the individual may become male or female based upon the environmental cues. This happens with many reptiles and many fishes. And you can have the kind of complete sequential hermaphroditism, what you mentioned with the clownfish, where an individual starts off as one sex and then after some point becomes the other sex. And there is an entire body within evolutionary biology, broadly called sex allocation theory, which deals with this in great detail. I mean, this is a very rich area within evolution to understand what kinds of factors promote the evolution of these different variant forms of being hermaphroditic, either sequentially or simultaneously.
There's an interesting question from a herpetologist called Chaitanya. He asks, do sizes in general get bigger as we move further away from the equator?
So it is true to some extent within species, because if you go to colder climates, then it helps to have a larger volume and lower surface area compared to that volume. While you find in the deserts species that have larger surface area compared to their volume. For instance, you have desert foxes with those large ears. It gives you surface to exchange heat. But I don't know that there is a pattern across all kinds of clades and all kinds of lineages. I mean, within lineages, yes, there tends to be this sort of relationship.
If I can add something to that from, again, the laboratory microcosm. Mm-hmm. So within fruit flies, Drosophila, you can observe two things. One is that if you take fruit fly eggs from the same population and rear them as larvae and pupae at a colder temperature versus a warmer temperature. So these are the same bunch of eggs from the same parent population. Half of them you are rearing at, say, 16 degrees centigrade, half of them at 28 degrees centigrade. The ones you rear during their pre-adult life stages, the larva, pupa, and so on, at cold temperature will become larger flies when they come out of the pupa compared to the ones that were reared at warm temperature. Okay, so this is one. You can also do another kind of experiment with fruit flies. You can take original parent population, split it into two, and generation after generation, rear one at cold temperature, and generation after generation rear the other one at warm temperature. So now you are looking at temperature not as something just experienced within one lifetime and looking at its effect on size, rearing temperature. Now you're looking at temperature as an evolutionary force. And you find that after many generations, the population you are keeping at cold temperature will evolve to become bigger. Okay. So at least with flies and some other invertebrates where this has been tried in laboratory settings, cold temperature can give rise to larger body size, both in terms of a within one generation effect of rearing temperature and also the effect of cold temperature as an environmental challenge across generations. What is truly interesting with Drosophila, of course, you can do all kinds of crazy follow-ups to this. I should also add that in Drosophila species that have been studied in nature, you find so-called clines in body size. So if you look in Australia along a latitudinal gradient, as you go away from the equator, the flies of the same species in nature also become bigger. You have a similar cline in South America, a similar cline in Africa. Okay. Now, the thing is, what you are seeing in nature could be a combination of both effects. The immediate effect that they are living in cold climate away from the equator, plus they have evolved in that cold climate away from the equator. Now, when you tease out these differences in body size between the warm temperature here, cold temperature, it's very interesting. It turns out that the underlying mechanisms by which body size is becoming bigger as a result of being reared as a larva in cold temperatures versus evolving in cold temperatures for many, many generations, the underlying mechanisms at the developmental biology level are quite different. In one case, cell sizes increase, cell numbers don't change very much. In the other case, I forget which case is which, I read this stuff long ago, cell numbers increase tremendously, cell size doesn't change very much. If you compare the underlying genetics of body size in the clines found in nature in South America and Africa and Australia, the underlying genetics is actually quite different on the three continents. The outcome in terms of the final body size is similar, because that is what is in some sense being driven by the ecological fact of being in a colder climate away from the equator. But how that goal, how that challenge is met at a developmental, at a genetic level can be very different. And this is a very common theme in evolution, that, the evolutionary challenge can get met by very different underlying mechanisms in different cases. This is a very, very common theme in evolution.
This is amazing. We should have an entire talk on convergent evolution one day. Just talk about the whole thing. Yeah, the herpetologist Chaitanya and I used to just sit and talk about that. Another interesting thing that came out of this conversation is now I know that whenever I travel up north and I put on weight, I have a biological excuse to get away with. So there are a few more questions which we'll ask. Okay, there's an interesting question by Arush Murali who says, do we find near spherical organisms that are multicellular? Interesting.
There are sponges.
Not size.
Sponges are, sponges are multicellular, but not, in the same way that many others phyla are multicellular.
It's interesting.
But there are near spherical sponges.
Yeah. There are also in the plant world these organisms among the green algae that are on the sort of cusp of multicellularity. So they
volvox.
The volvocaris, the whole group, volvox and other related species, which part of their life cycle they are kind of multicellular. Some species actually have some reproductive division of labor within that, and those are very spherical actually in structure.
Thank you, Arush. Interesting question. Induleka from YouTube asks, time scales of change of environment versus of organism. Any size dependence of time scale for change? Did I read that right? Yeah, please comment on time scales of change of environment versus that of organism. Basically, the extent of time does that have an effect on size?
So that would depend on the selection for large size, I would think. So if there's a strong selection pressure, you could probably change your size in a shorter time scale than otherwise. But then with time scales, it also depends on what kind of environment different species are in. So if you look at some lineages, for instance, if you look at some fish lineages which are in deep seas and the environmental condition doesn't change that much over very long periods of time, you find stasis in that morphologically those lineages continue to remain similar in morphology for very long periods of time. While in other lineages, you find that there are changes in morphology, changes in size over very short periods of time. So it would have to do with stability of the environmental conditions in which that lineage exists and other selection pressures that would cause the size to change.
Is this also the reason why we have different types of giant squid, like gigantic squid, colossal squid, and all those in deep sea? Because there, it's like you said, it's stasis, right? There's not much of change in the pressure over there.
Yeah, in many lineages, you don't find a lot of change if the environmental conditions are similar across very long time periods.
Okay. We're almost out of time, but here's a question from me. It's got nothing to do with biology, but I want to ask both of you from a different point of view. Do you, I believe that people have a tendency to be more empathetic or more fond of bigger creatures than smaller creatures. Okay. And this has led to the problem of endangering of certain species on a far bigger scale than others. And also, it also becomes worse when it's not a mammal. Humans like big mammals and they're like, oh, okay, elephant is endangered, we have to do something about it. But if I tell them there's a small mouse which is also endangered, it doesn't have that much of an effect on the whole thing. So would you like to comment on this?
I think it's a real effect.
It is real, okay.
I think so. I think it's a real effect. We like other species which we can relate to. So in that sense, mammals and birds over other kinds of species. Mammals, other apes over other mammals. And yes, I guess the larger size allows us to be awestruck by that size itself. But then having said that, I would think that if there are at least a few species that people would like to conserve, then those do serve as flagship species or umbrella species, where if you protect that species, you indirectly end up protecting the home ranges of a lot of other species. So elephants often serve that kind of a purpose. Or blue whales, for instance. I mean, if people can agree to protect the home range of blue whales, then you are indirectly protecting a lot of other species which range in those same waters.
Can I answer your question in a very different way?
Please go ahead. That is why it was asked.
I mean, I agree with what Professor Vidya just said, but I'm sort of taking this on a different tangent. So I think, see, first of all, it's not so much as we also mentioned about larger or smaller. It's we like things we can relate to. So roughly things that are on the same size scale as we are. And on top of that, you get this awestruck thing with the somewhat bigger, but they're at least on the order of magnitude scale, they are roughly the same size. And I think there is a broader thing here. It's not just with size, it's also with time. So since you said we are not really talking about biology, see, when we were students and we studied physics and physics was fun, and we studied mechanics and Newton's laws and things and levers and all pulleys and all that stuff. And it all intuitively made sense, right? And then the first time when you are exposed to quantum mechanics, suddenly it doesn't make common sense. you need a tremendous amount of training to be able to understand or make sense. See, first it comes as an assault to your senses. The same thing happens if you read about certain topics in astrophysics, for example. Now, why is that? I think, again, at the quantum scale, the atomic molecular scale and the astrophysics scales, you are on very large time scales versus very small time scales. And again, I think we are comfortable thinking about things that are on a size scale roughly our size and on a time scale roughly commensurate with our lifetimes. That is the world in response to which much of our evolution probably happened. And that is why thinking at those time and size scales comes, quote unquote, naturally to us. That is what we have evolved to be good at. If we want to transcend those evolved cognitive abilities and start thinking about very micro scales of space and time, very macro scales of space and time, it requires considerable effort and training.
That is a fantastic way to bring the entire concept of this exhibition onto the table, the concept of scale, because that is literally what the exhibition is about. Now, for all those who are listening, everything that Professor Joshi just said, we are trying to help you out with that, because over the next few days, we're going to have a few more talks, a few more lectures, and a lot of events on cosmiczoom.in, cosmic-zoom.in. It has, right now, it is open, it's launched, where you can look at what Sir just talked about macro and micro and where it goes. Another interesting fact that I had shared during the thing was there are whales in the ocean right now, which are older than the book Moby Dick. And like when we just tell people, oh, we have whales that are 200 years old, people are like, okay, I'm not able to fathom it. But when you put it in such a way saying, do you know the book Moby Dick? And they're like, yes, very old book. And like there are whales that are there which are older. And they're like, oh. So when you put it in relation to something, right, it makes it interesting. And then
there's
we share
a shark that's even older.
The Greenland shark, which is supposed to be 400 years old.
Yeah.
But here, okay, another interesting question which somebody's asked, which I'm going to answer through the Greenland shark. Somebody said, let me see if I can get it right there. How do systems of large species support themselves, breathing, health, diet, and more? I'll give you one answer. They are lazy. So the Greenland shark, for example, it lives for 400 years. It's one of the largest sharks. Only the basking, the whale shark is bigger. It's in Antarctic, it's in Arctic waters. So it's really, the metabolism is really slow. It eats very less. Whatever it eats becomes toxic in its body. And it loses its eyesight because it doesn't need eyesight. And it swims at the slowest speed possible and lives to 400 years.
Okay, but that's not a generality though.
Yeah, right. Well, since he brought up a Greenland shark, I'm like, if somebody told me, listen, you can be 400 years old, just sit on a sofa, don't move at all. But yes, thank you so much, Professors Joshi and Vidya, for this. It has been an amazing, we were supposed to do for 40 minutes. It's been almost an hour. Thank you for all the amazing people who have reached out to us and talked to us. And all there are lots of more questions. Let's see if I can get to it. As I said, there's lots of interesting things coming up. Please check out the Bash online event. For those who are here, there is an excellent lecture tomorrow by an ecologist called Vijay Ramesh. He's going to talk about Project Dhwani, where they are studying the biodiversity of the Western Ghats using sound. And it's at 7 p.m. the same time. The Google form is open. It's on FB, it's on Twitter, it's on Instagram, everywhere. You can go check it out right now. He will be taking us through that. And there are lots of more events coming up. There are events about from astrophysics to insects. There are lots of interesting things coming up. Thank you so much for being part of this. Would the professors like to say something to finish this session off? Professor Vidya?
I'm fine.
I'll just say, I think this is a great thing with the Cosmic Zoom exhibit that you guys have put up, and thanks for having us on to share some ideas here. It's been great fun.
It's an absolute pleasure. Can we have some reading material that you would, if anybody's interested? You did mention J.B.S. Haldane. Let me type that down.
Yeah, that essay, yes. The essay on being the right size.
On being the right size. That's available easily.
Okay, JBS Haldane. I just put it in the text box so that people who are interested can go check it out. It's really interesting. I would like to say also thanks to the team at ICTS for doing this, to Anupam Gopi and the other group for doing the work on the technical side. A huge shout out to Professor Ajit Parameswaran, who is the man behind this. Ajit is literally the driving force behind the whole thing, and it's been an honor and a pleasure to work with him, and the entire team who worked behind this. This is just the first week of events. There's far more, and may I also take this opportunity to welcome both of you back to come and be part of the other things that we're talking as well. And if any point of time you find something interesting, please do let us know. To everybody out there, follow us. It's at Zoom Cosmic on Twitter, at Cosmic Zoom on Facebook and Instagram. Remember, everything is absolutely free, right? You can, like, you know that uncle who sends you the good morning WhatsApp message in your family group, reply with this message saying there is an amazing event that's happening for the next 2 weeks. It's free. Please register. Okay, that's how we get people interested in science. Go out and tell everybody else. It's been thank you. Wish you all a good evening and good night. Thank you, professors.
Yeah.
Bye.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Good night.
Thank you. Bye.